Hi, it's Dave on Zilog and Moto, your home for all things Genesis, Master System, Sega CD, and 32X related. Even though I haven't done a 32X review yet. I promise, though, it's coming before the end of the first season. Hope you all have had a good week since I last saw you. Today, we're getting about as far from last week as possible, and based on last week's YouTube views, that's probably a good thing. Yeah, not too many fans of racing aces out there, huh? Anyway, in today's review, we're looking at The Great Waldo Search. A puzzle game? Yeah, I guess that's the best genre to put it in, although it probably should just be labeled a children's game, similar to Sesame Street Counting Cafe. And honestly, I wasn't expecting it to be like that, or else I would have spaced it out a bit more in the schedule. Let me explain a bit. The Great Waldo Search is the name of the third book in the Where's Waldo series, or at least for a period of time, in the United States, during which this game was conceived. What's the Where's Waldo series? Well, let's back up for a minute. Where's Wally is a series of children's picture books by British author and illustrator Martin Handford that feature a main character named Wally, known for his glasses, brown hair, red and white striped hat, and shirt. The Where's Wally books have minimal text, instead focusing on large illustrated pictures with many characters and odd things, with the object being a picture to find Wally amongst all the people and things in the scene. And sometimes the books will have an optional list of other strange things to find as well, such as maybe a polka dot picnic basket, or an upside down car, or any number of other small things that you might not notice right away without looking for them. The goal of the books is simple in that it teaches children to be observant and detail oriented in a fun way. They can also be enjoyed by adults as well, assisting the kids with locating Wally or any of the other objects. Now, if you've been paying attention, you notice that I first referred to the series as Where's Waldo, and then Where's Wally. Why is that? Well, originally Martin Handford named the character Wally, and as the books were translated and adapted for release in other countries, Wally's name was changed in certain locations. But as to why specifically it was changed to Waldo in the United States and Canada, I've no idea, and I've spent a while researching this on the internet. The best answer I could find was that supposedly Wally has negative connotations in North America, and the name was changed to avoid that. Personally, I think it's a load of crap. Now, if it was Willie and not Wally, I could understand, but in the US, Wally is simply short for Wallace. And it's certainly not an insult to call someone a Wally. Anyway, whether you call him Waldo or Wally, the series became hugely popular in the late 80s and early 90s due to the first three books, and of course, like all things popular, that makes it ripe for video game licensing. The Great Waldo Search is technically the second video game made about the series, with the first game imaginatively called Where's Waldo, appearing on the NES previously. Fun fact, the Great Waldo Search was never released in Europe for the Mega Drive, instead appearing exclusively for the Genesis in late 1992, with alternate versions on the Super Nintendo and NES as well. So the game at least did not enter into the Waldo-Wally controversy. And while it may seem a bit odd for the game not to appear in its source material's home country, I've got to say, England, you dodged a bullet here. Oh yeah. But that's getting ahead of ourselves. As we always do, let's take a closer look at the physical release and then investigate how or where this title may have gone wrong. And here's a hint. 3 letters. THQ. And here is the Great Waldo Search, with a cover that I can't decide if I like it or not. The cover art's pulled directly from the cover of the game's source book, and on the book it works really well. Keep in mind the book is much larger than this clamshell case, so while the art is cropped a bit, for the most part it's shrunk down considerably, making a fairly noisy background image. But it is unique and stands out on a shelf next to other Genesis games, which is probably why I chose it for this week's review. Flipping the game over to the back, thankfully the designers at THQ had the good sense to lay everything out in a plain white square for readability purposes. And I must say that everything is very neat and organized. On the left there's 2 flavored text paragraphs that probably oversell the level of excitement in the game just a bit, and then 4 bullet points below that that adequately summarize the game options. Over to the right there's 3 good looking screenshots from different levels in the game. They definitely represent the game well. In fact, other than the somewhat busyness of the font, my only minor complaint is the 1 to 2 player box on the back. That's a bit of a fib. I'll discuss that more later. But otherwise, this is a pretty great box layout, in stark contrast to Racing Aces last week, which was a pretty amateurish job. The entire case is in really good shape, with no visible scratches or nicks or anything to it, and the hang tab is intact at the top of the case. I'm going to guess that its condition is due to probably not having been played a whole lot, and there's reasons for that. Opening up the case, you'll see the cartridge and manual both in near mint condition, with the manual just having a bit of a curl towards the binding. The manual itself is thin, only about 10 pages long, not including the cover, but it still manages to thoroughly explain the game, and throw in a few screenshots for good measure. There's not a whole lot to say here. The game is in great shape for being 27 years old, and THQ's product designers did a great job with designing a product to sell. Did their programming staff do a similarly good job? Yeah, well, it's a THQ game released in the mid-90s, so you can probably guess the answer to that question. But let's go ahead and jump into it regardless. Oh boy. Where do we start? Where do we start? Well, as stated earlier, The Great Waldo Search is a puzzle game. However, it's not a puzzle game like Tetris or Columns or Puyo Puyo or anything like that. It's a puzzle game that's more in line with Hidden Pictures, where you're presented with a scene, and in that scene you have to find objects that are disguised in that scene, with some easier to find than others. It's a pretty simple concept, and one that's executed relatively well from a basic functionality perspective. The original book featured 12 large scenes across many mythical lands, with the idea behind the book being that Wizard Whitebeard has lost 12 magical scrolls, and he needs them back before they can fall into the wrong hands, or something. It's a kid's picture book, they're kind of light on the details. Anyway, in THQ's infinite wisdom, rather than translating those 12 scenes into the game for 12 levels, they decided to only include 5 scenes. Why did they decide to do this? Well, the simple answer is because they are cheap. The game only weighs in at 8 megabits, and I feel sure they could have fit the rest of the scenes into 16. They just chose to keep development and production costs down and squeeze every last penny out of the game that they could to balance out whatever the licensing cost for Waldo was. So you might be thinking, well, what are these 5 levels then, and how does this game work exactly? And also, possibly, what am I doing in my life that I'm watching a review of Where's Waldo video game? But that's a conversation for you to have between you and your shrink. I really can't help with there. But for the former, well, each level is essentially a translated scene from the book. When starting a new game, you can choose between one of the first 4 levels, or scenes, but can't play the 5th level, the Land of Waldos, until you've passed the first 4 levels. Well, unless you just select it directly from the game difficulty screen instead, bypassing everything, but that's just silly. They wouldn't include that as an option. Wait, they did? Seriously? So, previous to choosing one of the 4 starting levels, you're given an option. Do you want to play the game in normal mode, expert mode, or go straight to the aforementioned Land of Waldos? No options, no sound test, no high score screen, nothing. If you do choose to go straight to the Land of Waldos level, to be fair to the game, it's essentially a separate game mode as it operates sort of like a time attack. In both this mode, and if you're on your way to it after passing the other 4 levels, your goal is to find the magic scroll and special hobo Waldo that is missing a shoe, and is distinctive by walking around in a red and white striped sock. This is easier said than done, however, as there are tons of different Waldos in the level, amongst a mix of characters from the other 4 levels. If you find both the scroll and Waldo in time, you earn points, and then you get an opportunity to do the level again. And again, and again. And even if you don't find Waldo in time, you can retry the level to earn more points without losing any of your nest egg. I have no idea why this game mode was included, other than perhaps to give players a chance to practice it, since it works slightly different than the other 4 levels. A head scratcher to be sure. As far as the traditional 2-game modes are concerned, as you can imagine from their names, Normal is the normal difficulty, and Expert is the ever slightly more difficult version of Normal. In both game modes, you can select any of the 4 levels to play in whatever order you choose. As you play a level, you will scroll left and right amongst the scene to find Waldo and the Magic Scroll, which will both be hidden at different places in the scene. While scrolling, you also find score bonuses that can be clicked on, clocks that can either add to your time limit or pause the game on your screen while you attempt to find a special clue, and Waldo's dog Woof, which will initiate a short flying sequence where Woof attempts to collect bones before returning you to the scene. There's really only 2 differences between Normal and Expert. In Expert, the items are hidden slightly harder, possibly being partially obscured by elements of the scene, and also the clock clue sequences in Normal feature an audio clue that gets repeated until you find the item. Whereas in Expert, you're given a quick text hint from Wizard Whitebeard. I'm not sure how having an audio clue is easier than a text clue, but it's what they went with. To expound upon the 1 to 2 players box from looking at the back earlier, as a rule, the game only supports 1 player. However, if a second controller is plugged in, that controller can be used by someone assisting the main player by either moving the screen to the parts of the scene where Waldo, Woof, and the scroll are, or it can be used to stop the clock from running out if the player needs a few more seconds to find the items they're looking for. It's a cool idea and a good use of the hardware on the console, but calling this a full-fledged 2-player mode is disingenuous at the best. As you can imagine, with only 5 levels of gameplay total, the game is pretty short. In fact, in recording the video samples for this review, I only recorded about 20 minutes of gameplay, and that was enough to cover a full playthrough of both Normal and Expert modes. And that's also with me waiting until last to find Waldo and the scroll, instead finding every clock and score bonus first, as level end immediately upon finding both Waldo and the scroll, even if there's still bonuses to find. This is why I complained about the developers only including 5 of the 12 scenes from the original book. Being able to beat a game in 10 minutes is inexcusable. I understand that the game is aimed at a younger crowd, but even 8 to 10-year-olds should be able to dust this game very quickly, and then what? You're left with an unhappy kid and a paperweight that's going to collect dust.
Great job.
The drawn scenes in the game look good and resemble what you would think a 16-bit Where's Waldo game would look like, and they do justice to the scenes and characters from the book. However, each of the scenes has minimal animation, and for the most part, you're simply moving a magnifying glass cursor over a static screen. To account for the relatively low resolution of the Genesis, each of the scenes is about 5 or 6 screens wide, and moving the screen left or right is smooth and with no flicker. The music in the game isn't bad, but it's certainly not great. There's about 6 songs, one which acts as a general theme for the game, and then a track for each of the 5 levels. The songs' content vary, with certain tracks matching their levels better than others, but what struck me was the actual instrumentation in the musical tracks. Each track sounds like it was composed in the same manner as how the soundtrack to the original Wolfenstein 3D was. And for the more reserved tracks, you could have me do a blind test, and I wouldn't be able to tell you what game this music came from. Sound effects for the game are very minimal, but there are some good quality voice samples that are used to give the game a nice interactive feel, similar to how Sesame Street County Cafe was, but not quite used to that extent. Overall, I'm giving Great Waldo Search 1 star. The complete lack of depth in the game absolutely ruins it, and kills any possible replay value. I could easily see even the biggest Waldo fans beating the game once and putting it away to never ever play it again. It's not the exercise in frustration the American Gladiators was, which allows it to stop short of being a complete bomb, but even compared against other children's titles, it comes up far short. I could see a Waldo collector potentially trying to snare a copy of this to go with their books and other collectibles, but anyone else should be directed to stay far away from this title. Okay, there's the Great Waldo Search. In this case, I can definitely say that the book was better. Tune in next week when we stay on the Genesis, and in honor of the Astros and Nationals fighting it out in the World Series, we'll look at the first game in a long-running baseball series on the Genesis that also appeared on various home computers in the mid-80s. I myself put plenty of hours into the Commodore 64 version, and remember it fondly. Hopefully the Genesis version will provide me with similar warm feelings. Remember, whatever you play, have fun. and be excellent to each other. Later.